Today's event is to both discuss and celebrate the publication of the new book by the Union of Concerned Scientists, Fukushima, the story of a nuclear disaster, and we're very privileged to have with us the co-author of the book, David Lochbaum, the senior nuclear science person at the Union of Concerned Scientists, who's swinging through the West Coast on this tour. You can't not come to the Diablo Canyon community with a book like this. By the way, if there are any left, 6 left. Here's how it works. Guys, we ordered a box. They are so back-ordered, it was a race to see if this box was even going to get here. So we'll give you the information on that. There are 6 left. You just take it to the counter and run it through Mr. Steinberg's credit card machine, which sales tax. The Alliance is a nonprofit, selling tax we can't do. But he'll take care of that. For those of you who didn't get one, it's on Amazon, where they had a nice little blurb about it today, or it's available with a link at the Union of Concerned Scientists website, and we have some postcards and we can give that at the end. So, that was the introduction out of the way. Dave Lochbaum, of course, for those of you who've been following these issues for a year, know the brief biography that he graduated with a degree in nuclear engineering just before 3 Mile Island, and then spent
just after
3 Mile Island.
I have an alibi.
And then went to work for the nuclear industry anyway for the next decade and a half or so before going to the Union of Concerned Scientists, where he's been since, except for a brief sabbatical at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So talking about knowing it from all sides of a story, we can say that he knows of what he speaks. Of course, those of us in this community are well aware of the events of 3 years ago at Fukushima. In fact, you know, while David's speaking, I'm going to grab a couple of documents, which the Congleton show we can get out today. You might find them useful. Let me grab those. And we'll leave you to Dave Lochbaum, Union of Concerned Scientists, co-author of Fukushima's Story of a Nuclear Disaster.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility and the Mothers for Peace. I've worked with both organizations for many years. This is the first live book event I've done. It's not a coincidence that it's this area. This area is very aware, very engaged, very involved, and it's the right audience to go and talk to about nuclear safety issues. As you know, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, our form of democracy works best when it's not a spectator sport, when people get involved. So appreciate you having many options tonight, choosing to spend it here tonight and sharing it with us. Hopefully at the end of this you'll feel that investment in time was worth it. If not, keep me honest. Look at my email address, follow up, make sure you get your time's worth, and we'll try to deliver either tonight or down the road till you feel you get your investment in time's worth. David mentioned the tragic events of March 11th, 2011. On that day, I was on Capitol Hill to provide a briefing to congressional staffers on the first of a series of annual reports that the UCS was doing on the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and nuclear power plant safety. We had about 50 to 60 people staffers indicate they were going to show up, perhaps because we were giving away a free lunch, I don't know. But because of events earlier that day, only 5 showed up, which was somewhat disappointing, but there was a lot of cookies left over that I was able to take home, so there's always something good that you can make out of this. But on that day, and as the event started about 4:30 our time, 2 in the afternoon their time, there was a problem. The earthquake was the first in the series of dominoes that led to disaster. That earthquake caused 3 things at Fukushima. First of all, the ground motion from such a large earthquake caused the 3 reactors that were operating at the time to automatically shut down within seconds. There's only one nuclear plant in the United States that has that similar type of arrangement. It's Diablo Canyon. Many other reactors have earthquake sensors in the United States, but they have procedures that would direct the operators to shut down the reactor if the levels got too high. Diablo Canyon has sensors that would automatically trip the reactor, as did the sensors at Fukushima on that day. On that day, Fukushima Daiichi is a 6-reactor site. There are 6 reactors side by side. 3 of the reactors were shut down on that day for scheduled refueling challenges. Units 1, 2, and 3 are operating close to full power until the earthquake motion caused the reactor to automatically shut down. The second thing that the earthquake did that affected Fukushima site was it basically knocked down the power lines, disconnecting the plant from its normal supply of electricity. The plant was designed for a large magnitude earthquake, but the transmission lines were not. So they came down and the plant lost its normal supply of electricity, much the way that the other Canadian plants in the United States are. There wasn't anything particularly vulnerable or particularly strong in the Japanese arrangement. The earthquake took out normal supply power. Because of that eventuality, that you're not designed for a very highly reliable electric power grid, each of the 6 reactors at Fukushima had 2 on-site emergency diesel generators that would automatically start and provide power to the equipment needed to cool the reactor cores and the spent fuel cores. The plant each reactor only needed 1 of those 2 to do its job. The second was provided as redundancy. All of them started up and were doing that function for about the first 45 or 50 minutes. The third thing that happened was that the earthquake caused a tsunami. That tsunami arrived at Fukushima about 45 to 50 minutes later. The plant was designed with tsunamis in mind, small tsunamis. It was designed with a 15-foot tall seawall along its entire length. The wave that arrived was about 45 feet tall. That seawall barely even slowed down. The wave was pushed inland. The wave flooded. Those emergency diesel generators that were saving the day initially were all housed in the basements of the building to provide maximum protection against earthquakes. You put something very heavy up on stilts, it's more likely it will fall over. So they put it in the basement of the buildings. Maximum protection against earthquakes, very minimal protection against flooding. The flooding came in through louvers and doors, ventilation louvers, came in a number of ways, got into the basement. Water and electricity didn't mix any better than oil and water. So the emergency diesel generators stopped running. Had it not been for the flooding, they were toast anyway. The tsunami wave took away the fuel oil tanks. The diesel generators swept them out to sea. So the diesels, had they survived the flooding, would have run out of gas or fuel oil fairly quickly. Even if they'd have survived that, was able to get fuel oil in there. These are diesel generators like car engines, need water cooling for the engines. The tsunami took away the cooling water pumps as well. So the diesel generators were dead 3 ways over. The plant's designed for loss of the normal power supply and emergency diesel generators, just like plants here in the United States. Fukushima was equipped with 8 hours worth of batteries, banks of car batteries basically. There were enough of them to provide enough electricity for 8 hours for 1 safety system per reactor. Now you're down to normal supply of electricity, everything works. Diesel generators, you have a subset, a couple of systems will work. You get down to batteries, you're down to 1 system. The floodwaters, they are also located in the basement of the building. The floodwaters disabled many of the batteries. On some of the units, the batteries survived and were doing their thing until the meter ran past 8 hours. Many of the plants, 93% of the reactors in the United States are only equipped with 4 hours worth of batteries. The other 7% have 8 hours worth of batteries. So Japan was a little bit protected, better protected than the average plant in the United States. Once the batteries were either damaged by the floodwaters or became depleted because they could only run for 8 hours, the operators were left with very few choices. They had 3 layers of defense. The event had basically wandered through all 3 of them and destroyed or eliminated all 3 choices. The safety net to those 3 choices are portable pumps and portable generators that workers can move from wherever they're stored, hook them up, and use them to move water into the reactor cores, the metal vessels holding the reactor cores. The problem with that was, first of all, it's kind of difficult to find these things. The site had been inundated up to 14 feet by the tsunami. There was no power. There were aftershocks. The workers were moving through darkened buildings in water that was 18 inches deep. In some areas where manhole covers had been blown off of their place by the tsunami waters. So they risked stepping into a 10-foot hole if they misplaced a step here or there in the dark. They also had problems. There were no phones or radios or anything like that, so when they were sent out in the plant to see if a valve was open or if they could open up a valve so they could allow this temporary equipment to work, they had to run back to the control room to tell them that that task was completed. There was no way to get it back. So they were doing a lot of efforts in short order without instructions. The other problem they had, which is, it's hard to say it was bigger than that because that's a fairly daunting problem, but the other problem they faced was that the portable pumps could only provide water at a pressure that was 1/3 of the pressure that's in the reactor vessels. We provided low pressure pumps to provide makeup to a high pressure system. Probably not the brightest day we've ever had with power safety. So what the workers had to do in order to use the pumps they were given was to lower the pressure inside the reactor vessel so the pumps could get the water inside. The valves that they needed to operate had been installed 20 years ago to deal with the station blackout that they faced. However, in a station blackout, they don't work. You need both electricity and air power for these valves to work. You have that unless you have a station blackout. You lose the diesel generators and the batteries, and these things don't work. And they proved that again. We kind of knew that in advance, but they proved that again on March 11th. They couldn't get the valves to open. They literally sent workers out into the parking lot to pull batteries out of cars and SUVs. And they went to a contractor's lot to get a compressed air cylinder and then ventured back into the dark, hot, 18-inch fill of water to try to get that to work. It took them a while to do that because they also had no procedures. They had to look on drawings to figure out where these things were located, using flashlights to illustrate the blueprints. By the time they got there, they had another problem that was more politically motivated, and that was because of some incidents in Japan in the past with atomic bombs. The Japanese populace is very concerned about radiation. Not that we are not, but they're super sensitive to radiation. The company policy was not to release radiation without the government's permission. So as the workers struggled to figure out where these valves were and get the temporary power, compressed air to do that, they were waiting on the government to give them the thumbs up to make that happen. And the infrastructure damage around the Fukushima area was pretty severe. So it was difficult for the government to verify that everybody that was downwind had been evacuated or sheltered. So it took a while for those OKs or those all clears to get back to the site. Ultimately, they ended up venting before everybody had gotten out of harm's way. Many people were moved, relocated, not everybody. And unfortunately, some of the ones that didn't get out were in the direction that the wind was blowing that day. When you open up these valves, you're venting pressure outside, from inside the container outside. It's like opening up the air in the balloon. You just getting the air out so you can lower the pressure. By that time, there had been some fuel damage, and the radiation was in that building and went out once they opened up those valves. The other problem they had, they had probably a world record number of problems in just a few days, but another one of the problems they faced was that once they hooked up these portable pumps and portable generators, got the valve pressure down, what they didn't have was any idea of where that water was going. It's a big plant, a lot of valves, a lot of pipes. On the blueprints, they showed a nice direct path to the reactor vessel, but they didn't know where all the valves were positioned. Some of them could have been open, allowing some of that water to go elsewhere. We found out later that some of the water ended up in a turbine building, far away from where it was intended. And it didn't do any cooling of the reactor core on its way to the turbine building. So they were really trying. And I think one of the more poignant moments was we found that they had struggled for hours, nearly 8 hours, to restore power to one pump. To try to get from a port for power generator to one pump so they could get 60 gallons per minute into the reactor core. Very modest, 60 gallons per minute, but they needed whatever they could get. They got that hooked up, they made the power connection, they restored the power to that one pump. 6 minutes later, the Unit 1 reactor building blew up, injuring some of the workers, carrying the hoses and the electric lines they just laid. 6 minutes after they finished that arduous task, they lost that option. Almost lost their lives, so I guess it could have been worse, but they lost that option. That moment occurred in our country about 8:30 in the morning, Saturday morning, and I happened to be watching that on TV. That's the lowest moment in my professional career by far, because once you see a building blow up that's not supposed to blow up, you know that a lot of people are in for many, many long months. It's not going to get better, and it didn't. Basically, it became nuclear dominoes. Unit 1 blew up, Unit 4 blew up, Unit 3 reactor building blew up. The only reason Unit 2 didn't blow up, looks like, is because Unit 1 blew up right next door to it and opened up some of the sidewalls for Unit 2, providing a pathway. I need to cycle back to explain why those buildings blew up, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. Because of the challenges they had getting cooling water into the reactor cores, eventually the Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3 reactor cores overheated and began melting down. There's a well-known phenomenon. Once this type of metal that houses the nuclear fuel becomes overheated, it reacts with the water and the steam to produce very, very large amounts of hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas, is anyone who's seen the Hindenburg film, is flammable, very, very flammable. This hydrogen gas was supposed to go out through the vent lines with the radiation that was going far and wide. But because of the high pressure they had in the case, they were literally lifting the top off of the primary containment building. It's bolted on, very large. I can't lift it even with everybody here. It's very, very large, very, very heavy. Bolted on, but the pressure inside was lifting it off the studs, allowing gas and radioactivity to leak into the building where it's not supposed to be. Something, we don't know what, but something then detonated that hydrogen gas and blew up, like I said, Unit 1, Unit 3, and Unit 4 buildings. Unit 4 did not have an ounce of fuel in its reactor vessel at the time. Because of that, when we saw the Unit 4, we didn't see it because it happened at night, but when the Unit 4 reactor building blew up, it was thought that its spent fuel pool had overheated, melted, and produced the hydrogen. It turns out that wasn't the case, and I'll get to that just a little bit later. But hydrogen was a very good clear sign. Units 1, 2, and 3 were in distress, to perhaps understate it. They were in a very bad way. The only option that the Japanese had left really was to pump in seawater to the reactor vessels. The Pacific Ocean was relatively close by. They could get the pumps to move seawater into the reactor vessels. The plant manager, Superintendent Yoshida, ordered his workers to do that. That's a death knell for the plant if the meltdown wasn't already, because salt water is very corrosive, and the plant's not really designed with metals that are resistant to seawater. So if you use seawater, the plant's life is over. But Yoshida decided the life was over anyway. We need to do what we can to protect the workers and the public. He ordered them to start it. When senior managers, by video conference back in Tokyo, heard that this had started, they ordered him to stop it because they wanted to wait for government sanction approval for injecting the seawater and ending the life of this plant. Yoshida, the Japanese culture is very obedient. It's very difficult for someone like Yoshida to disobey a direct order, but he did. He called his senior official over and said, I'm going to issue an order in a minute telling you to stop everything. Ignore that, keep everything running. Sent the guy away. With the videotape running, or the video conference running back to Tokyo, he called the guy over and yelled at him to stop everything. The guy walks off, doesn't stop a thing. I think Yoshida, I think it showed they were trying to do the best they can under the circumstances. They ran out of time, ran out of options. But I don't know too many people, including myself, that would like to be directed by the board of directors and everybody can fire me 6 ways from Sunday tells me to stop something. I'm not sure I'd have done it. So I think Yoshida deserves a lot of credit for faking out his bosses and doing the right thing. Sadly enough, it really wasn't enough. By that time, the damage had been done. Because even if you're injecting seawater, because of the valve configuration issue, very little of that water was getting into the reactor cores. To this day, we don't we have a general idea where the reactor cores are, but we don't know if they're in the reactor vessels, they've melted through and are now on the floor of the containment or elsewhere. The challenge has been it's very radioactive, and it would be a suicide mission to send people into that area. They've tried to use remote-controlled vehicles, boats, fiber optic cables, little bitty airplanes or helicopters. The problem is there's a lot of concrete in the containment building, and it shields the controller, who's in the safe area with a little gadget inside that's trying to move around. They've tried to use tethered remote control devices, but there's so much debris inside containment that the little tether, just like a dog wraps around a post, doesn't take very long for those tethered vehicles to become inoperative. So they have a general idea. It's somewhere in the containment building. It's going to probably take years before they get in there and know for sure where the core ended up. When we melted down the 3 Mile Island accident, or 3 Mile Island core in March 1979, I was still in college and had the Alamo. It wasn't until 4 years later that they dropped the camera from above to look at the core. I talked to Bob Long, who was in charge of dropping the camera in there. They dropped it down to where the camera should have been sitting on top of the fuel. There was nothing, just a black void. So they dropped it another inch, kept on going until it was like 5.5 feet down before they saw a rubble bed of what had been the core before it melted. That took 4 years to get that, but Japan's got much more damage. 3 reactors may take a little bit more than 4 years to get that camera in and have a look-see. Turning to Unit 4, which was empty on its reactor vessel, it's empty on the day. It had shut down in December of 2010 for a scheduled refueling. All of the fuel had been offloaded into the spent fuel pool. But about the same time as Unit 3's reactor building blew up, so did the Unit 4 reactor building, which led a lot of folks, including us, into thinking that water had gotten out of the Unit 4 spent fuel pool, causing the fuel there to overheat, generate the hydrogen, and provided the source of its explosion. It wasn't until June or July of 2011 where they took samples of the water in the Unit 4 spent fuel pool that showed that there wasn't enough radioactivity in there to indicate that fuel had been damaged. There was radioactivity in there because 3 reactors next door had blown up and deposited some radiation there, but it wasn't enough to suggest that the fuel inside at the bottom of the pool was damaged. Then later, September, October of that year, they analyzed a line that cross-connects Unit 3 with Unit 4. It showed that hydrogen and radiation flowed through that pipe, which is about 20-inch diameter pipe connected to 2 buildings. The Unit 3 hydrogen flowed into the Unit 4 building and blew up. That was confirmed also by radiation levels, which were higher as you moved into the building. If it had come from Unit 4, the levels would have been higher in the reverse direction. So they didn't. But that Unit 4 spent fuel pool was the reason that 5 days into the accident, the U.S. government recommended that U.S. citizens evacuate out to 50 miles. At that time, the Japanese government was doing limited evacuations out to about 22 miles. The U.S. government, after considerable apprehension about showing up in Japan, decided to recommend that U.S. citizens go out to 50 miles. Long after the event, through the Freedom of Information Act, we got some of the records about the calculations and the decision-making that the U.S. government went through in making that decision. 50 miles, at 50 miles, the computer studies showed that radiation levels were well above EPA limits for safe exposure. So the decision was made to go out to 50 miles. The chairman of the NRC asked, well, what about 60 miles or 70 miles? Computer models only went out to 50 miles. They didn't go out any further. Radiation didn't stop at 50 miles. That's where the computer models stopped. So the recommendation only went as far as the models did. The real reason those are the same models we use here in the United States. The difference between us and Japan is we're luckier than they were. They're luckier right now, ours hasn't yet. The other reasons for the evacuation order was the NRC staff, who by that time had people in Japan, in Tokyo, because they weren't allowed on site, but they were up in Tokyo, felt that the Unit 4 spent fuel pool was dry, had no water in it at all. They based that on the fact that there was no vapor coming off the pool. If the pool had water in it, it's not being cooled, it should be boiling, you should see vapor. They saw nothing, so they assumed it was dry. dry. With it dry, the radiation levels, the amount of fuel outside of containment, because now after the explosions, the top walls and roofs were gone for the unit 1, 3, and 4 reactor buildings. If any fuel in the spent fuel pool will become damaged and release radioactivity, there is nothing at all to stop it from going far downwind. So the NRC modeled a spent fuel, release from a spent fuel pool, and release from the unit 2 reactor because its containment was also known to be failing. That's what led to the evacuation order. In hindsight, the radiation level of the unit 4 spent fuel pool wasn't that bad. The radiation levels would not, the radioactive cloud wouldn't have been that lethal, so that we might not have had to evacuate. But given what the NRC knew when they knew it, that was the right call to make. Having made that decision, it was a difficult challenge. The White House got involved, the Department of Energy got involved, the State Department obviously got involved because we're dealing with a foreign country. And it was actually the U.S. Ambassador in Tokyo, John Roos, who issued the evacuation order, or recommendation, however. He did that after consultation, after advice from the entire government to do that. I think it was the right thing for us to do. We immediately started seeing with states in the United States challenging the NRC. Here in the United States, if there's a problem at Diablo Canyon, the federal government has no say about evacuation or sheltering you folks. That's the governor of the state who has that authority, and only has that authority. The NRC can make recommendations, DOE can make recommendations, the White House can make recommendations, but the governor is the only one who can make that call. So states started saying, well, you don't trust the Japanese, they are the ones to make that call. If you don't agree with our governor, are you going to go out on New York Times or show us up or challenge what? So the NRC had a lot of feathers, ruffled feathers to mend here in the United States. What we've suggested is every 2 years they run an emergency exercise at every nuclear power plant in the United States. Periodically during those exercises, have the NRC simulate disagreeing with the government and seeing whether they arm wrestle or paper, rock, scissors, or whatever they do to resolve that disagreement, because it may arise someday. So let's role play that and figure out how we're going to handle that.
If I might, in the same vein, before I move too further afield, that at dinner we were sharing some various stories that, you know, I believe, and I think a majority of the community here would, that most of the workers in the nuclear industry are conscientious. Most of them want to go home safely and successfully at the end of their shifts. Most never anticipate the kind of event that happened in Tokyo. But now we have workers who are actually taking, I would say, to Japan, no less drastic action than those same American equivalents would have at the site of the World Trade Center. And you were telling us a little bit about sort of this ruthless triage of attrition that was going on among the workers.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. There was, at some point, the workers at Fukushima could see the writing on the wall. Well, they could, it was dark, but I mean, had they had lights, they could have seen the writing on the wall. Assignments started being made to the older workers at the site, and not the ones that were most qualified or younger on it. As a result of that, the workers kind of knew what game was playing, why this was happening. The radiation levels were becoming so high that it was threatening. The tasks that they were being assigned might not be suicidal, but just a step below that, it may really give you an increased chance of cancer and other problems. Older workers, perhaps past the point of raising families, they were trying to protect the younger workers from that hazard. But everyone in that room had to know what was going on. But nobody got up, headed out to the parking lot and headed home. They stuck at their jobs and continued to be there. Chuck Casto, who headed the NRC team in Japan for almost a year after the accident, said at a meeting about a year ago, we closed the book quoting Chuck Casto, saying that what we in the nuclear industry community need to learn from is to have no more heroes. Chuck worked at the Browns Ferry plant in Alabama when it had a very disastrous fire in 1975 that almost caused 2 meltdowns, and very heroic workers that day prevented that from happening. He also knows about 3 Mile and Chernobyl. The fact that the first people to die will be the workers. So Chuck called for no more heroes. We thought that was the exact right sentiment. Regardless of whether you're pro-nuclear power or anti-nuclear power or whatever, but we shouldn't have to put workers and the public into that kind of situation once, let alone every 10 years. We've got to make this stop, or at least slow down. So that's what the accident was. You know, they ultimately got power back. It took 9 days to get power back to the site. The batteries are designed to last for 8 hours. It took them 9 days. Kind of a gap. Didn't work out well for them. They got power back. They started putting systems back in service. They were doing once-through cooling. They were taking ocean water, running it through the reactor core, and was ending up in the basement. But they at least were cooling the reactors. Ultimately, they went back to closed-loop cooling, where you're circulating the same water through the core, so you're not increasing the amount of radioactive contaminated water you have to deal with. 3 years later, they have over 80 million gallons of radioactively contaminated water to deal with. It's a larger. They have leaks and spills all the time because when you have thousands of tanks holding water, you're going to have leaks and spills. That's just the way it works. And they're proving that right again also. In those 3 years, they've done a number of things to better deal with the radioactive contamination at the site. They've erected scaffolding for temporary buildings around the buildings that blew up. They now pull air from the inside and filter it before it goes out to the atmosphere to reduce the amount of radioactivity being carried downstream. They've also removed all the new fuel and much of the irradiated fuel from the U4 spent fuel pool. They started that last November. It took them until then to shore up the building that had been subject to earthquake damage, hydrogen explosions, and dumping tons of water from above. So things are getting better. They're still not out of the woods. They got literally, the estimate is $150 to $250 billion of cleanup yet to do. And the schedule is something like 30 years, give or take a week. It took 10 years to clean up 3 Mile, and it was a smaller disaster than Chernobyl or Fukushima was, so it's going to take a while. There's also talk, and we see it recently, about radioactivity release from Fukushima and what impact it might have had in the U.S. waters, West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska. And because of the dilution, it is detectable here in the West Coast, but it's not in concentrations likely to cause discernible health effects. That's not true in Japan. There's 80,000 people that still can't go home, and likely will never go home because of the radioactive contamination. Shortly after the accident, the Japanese government basically enrolled all school children into the nuclear industry because nuclear workers are allowed to receive more radiation than the public is. So they just raised the limit to the public, to the nuclear worker. So all the school children are now nuclear workers, at least respect to the radiation limits. That didn't go over real well in Japan. So about a week or two later, they went back to the original limits and decided to protect school children rather than sacrifice them. So that was a good decision. A better decision would have been not make the mistake in the first place, but after that's happened, just correcting it is a good idea.
Before we get finished with the Unit 4, you talked about the spent fuel pool damage and what was perceived and what wasn't. In this community, in Diablo Canyon, there is a concern about our spent fuel pools. There's also a concern about moving the waste from the pools to the casks, getting it out of the water as quickly as possible. Maybe you can relate what your team discovered about wet storage versus dry storage in the case of Fukushima.
This is a secret. Not many people know this about Fukushima. Nobody's filmed. Whoops. There were 408 fuel assemblies in dry storage at Fukushima on Marshall. In fact, there's still 408 in dry storage at Fukushima. The floodwaters submerged these casks holding these 408 fuel assemblies. Before the tsunami arrived, air cooling, just the chimney effect of air moving past something hot, being warmed up, leaving, sucking in more air behind it, was cooling these 408 fuel assemblies. During the flooding, when the site was flooded to about 14 feet, water was providing the cooling. When the floodwaters receded within an hour, air cooling picked right back up. No need for power grid, emergency diesel generators, batteries, portable pumps, helicopters dropping water from above, nature, passive safety features, protected us. Here in the United States, 75% of our spent fuel is in spent fuel pools, where you could hardly make the risk any higher unless you replace the water with kerosene or nitroglycerin or something. I should have said that when we were doing that. But only 25% is in dry casks. Based on the casks that we've been using since the early 90s, we could flip those numbers, move most of the fuel into dry casks. Dry casks are not invulnerable, but not much can go. It's much easier to cause a problem in a spent fuel pool than a dry cask. Even if a dry cask has a problem, there's much less fuel in it, and the radioactive cloud that's emitted is much smaller, so the number of people in harm's way much lower. NRC did a study in June of last year that showed that the differences are so large between a spent fuel pool accident and a cask accident that it's shame on us for allowing that to happen. Because if that accident ever happens, it can't be an accident. Criminal negligence, manslaughter, or something like that. But since you know about it and you do nothing about it, it really can't be an accident.
In fact, you say that even though the casters themselves were covered with seaweed and the detritus of the sea, there's no subsequent...
No, they did go out to inspect it. The seawater didn't corrode the cask or accelerate their aging. They came through fine compared to the rest of the planet. If that had been the only problem, we wouldn't know about Fukushima today. That wasn't their only problem.
Action item to point out that the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility has filed at the Public Utilities Commission in PG&E's decommissioning case, where every 3 years they ask for money to be put into the decommissioning fund. And we filed a motion saying they should provide some kind of justification for why we can't begin using money from the decommissioning fund to expedite the removal of the fuel from the canisters, from the pools to the dry casks. We repeatedly asked everyone from the NRC's chairman, Allison McFarland, to the staff people, is there anything that prevents the state from requesting the utility to expedite the footage? In other words, will you at the NRC try to claim some sort of federal preemption or lawsuit? And the NRC has said, no, we won't. We can't make them do it, but we can't stop someone else from asking. As long as it meets our minimum requirements, we can't stop someone else from asking them. And we thought, well, who else can ask them? Easy. The Public Utilities Commission could put it into the, say, here's where we expect some of the money to be spent on expediting this. After all, we pointed out, this really, although it's expensive, is actually kind of cheaper now to do it while the plant is generating electricity and revenue than try and find some way to pay for it 25 years from now when the ratepayers aren't getting anything for their money. And so expect to see posted on our website not long from now our filing in that particular PUC case to try and make that a reality based on the sorrowful experiences that Dave here has illustrated from Japan.
Well, speaking of sorrowful experiences, March 15th, 2012 comes to mind. On that date, Senator Boxer's Environment and Public Works Committee held an NRC oversight hearing. Senator Barrasso, on that committee, asked the 4 commissioners, but not the chairman, whether Fukushima could happen here. They went down the road, no it can't. No it can't. 3 days earlier, on March 12th, 2012, they ordered every plant owner in the country to take 3 steps to lessen the vulnerability of our plants to the accident they don't think can happen. They were playing PR rather than telling the truth. Either you don't issue the orders because there's no problems, or you tell the Senate the truth that there are problems. I'm glad at least they issued the orders because they're taking steps to better protect Americans. I just wish they trusted us with the truth about why they did that instead of lying to the Senate.
do they lie to the public? Well, wait, but it's always nice when you have the memos in your hand. And for those who didn't see it, about the day of the anniversary, MSNBC had a reporter who found this major cache of Freedom of Information Act, this like 50 gigabytes worth of memos that flew back and forth at the NRC. Now, I must say, not any, asking friends, had to scroll through them manually because they're digitized in a way that are not searchable. And so page by page until I would see the word Diablo, which would show up once in a while. You should know that the letter sent from the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility ended up in there under a memo. They're asking questions, as did the statement of the Mothers for Peace. This did cross their desks. This is the one I found interesting, though. Elliot Brenner, the Director of Public Affairs, item number 4. Nuclear reactor regulation is getting tasked with making an overlay of the Japanese conditions, and 8.9 and whatever height of the wave was, to see how West Coast plans stack up against it. We think preliminarily Diablo would have no trouble with a wave that size. About the 8.9 we're not so sure about, but again, we're not talking about that. Well then, that motivates a memo from Susan Lloyd. I don't know what her status was there. Communications Department. Secretary of Energy, quote, Chu got in a bit of trouble when asked directly if U.S. plants could withstand a 9.0. He talked about acceleration and shaking, was directly asked about what Diablo Canyon could handle. He got tied up in saying about 6.2. Then there's a response from David McIntyre, also in the Public Affairs Department, and his response to her was, quote, he should just say, yes it can, and worry about being wrong when it doesn't. Sorry if I sound cynical, quote. So, and that's part of the problem is, and I think we'll turn this now that we've gotten back to Diablo Canyon about, well, let's take them at that. What is and isn't possible to happen here? And I know, as Dave has outlined to some of our elected officials today, there's the seismic and there's the fire threat, which it turns out is pretty darn high on the list. Maybe Dave would like to...
On the 3-year anniversary, March 11, 2014, I posted a blog called Nuclear Disaster American Style. And basically I said, imagine that earthquake had not occurred off the coast of Japan, but off the coast of California. The 1-2 punch that doomed Fukushima was the earthquake and the tsunami. Took away all the power. The 1-2 punch that would have doomed Diablo Canyon was the earthquake, takes away the electrical power grid just as it did at Fukushima, and a fire that may have been started by the earthquake. Earthquakes have been known to start fires. Diablo uses hydrogen gas for cooling, a lot of flammable oils for lubrication. There's a lot of flammable materials at Diablo Canyon. It's also known that Diablo Canyon does not meet and has never met for a single moment over its entire life the NRC's fire protection regulations. That's more than an academic or moot point because in July of 2008, the NRC senior managers testified to their commission that at the average nuclear power plant, fire represents 50% of the meltdown risk, which means it's equal to all other hazards combined. And that's if you meet the regulations, it's equal to everything else added up. Pretty bad. The reason it's so high is for the same reason floodwaters do in Fukushima. A fire can wipe out the normal safety systems and their backups. It's not just hypothetical. I'm talking about Chef Castro and the heroic work of the operators at Browns Ferry. That was started by one guy with a lit candle checking for air leaks in the room right below the control room. He found the air leak, and the candle lit the insulation. It was very flammable. Fire burned out of control for 6.5 hours, destroyed all of the controlling power for the safety systems on Unit 1 and the majority of those systems on Unit 2. It was only heroic operator actions that day that prevented both those reactors from melting down. March 1975, 1980, the NRC adopts regulations on fire protection to better manage the fire hazard and not replicate, or worse, what happened at Browns Ferry. Diablo Canyon and roughly half the reactors in the United States don't meet those 1980 regulations. That was discovered by the NRC in the late 90s. I don't know why it took them 20 years to figure out that half the plants in the country weren't meeting fire protection regulations. Maybe that's another book. I don't know. Yes?
Just very briefly, talking about units for spent fuel. What about any spent fuel that was damaged?
Okay. The question was, I mentioned Unit 4 spent fuel seems to have come through unscathed. The question was, what about the other spent fuel? Fukushima had 7 spent fuel pools, one for each reactor, and a common pool they used as a staging area. All the fuel in there was jeopardized for a while. Unit 4 was the most critical and most vulnerable because it was the hottest spent fuel, temperature-wise. The explosions opened up the roofs and buildings and allowed helicopters and fire trucks to spray tons of water every day into the spent, or towards the spent fuel pool, because spent fuel pool is this big and they're dropping from, they missed a lot. But they ultimately, those water drops were successful in preventing all 7 pools from overheating and becoming damaged. There was no spent fuel, other than the fact that when explosions blew stuff up into the air, gravity pulled it right back down, and it landed on top of the spent fuel pools, and there was some fuel that was squashed from heavy stuff falling on it. But other than that, it was no overheating damage of any note. Well, I'll wrap up a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to bring it back to the finalize with the link to Diablo Canyon, and then we're going to open it up for the remaining part of the evening for question and answer. Because you said the fire was one component, and the other one is and remains the seismic issue.
We worked with the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility last November to issue a report called Seismic Shift, which is available on both our websites. I'm not a seismologist. I can't tell you what the Richter value should be for Diablo Canyon or what the G-force the plant should be designed for. But instead of doing that, I looked at the past cases where the NRC or its predecessor, the Atomic Energy Commission, has encountered a plant where the seismic threat is larger than it's protected against, as Diablo Canyon is today. In all of those cases, involving facilities in Maine, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, California, in all of those, several plants here in California, in all of those cases, the NRC required the plant not operate until the safety shortfall was rectified. The exception to the rule is Diablo Canyon, which continues to operate. As I said earlier today, Diablo Canyon is protected against an earthquake unless an earthquake occurs. Yeah. And that's really not the way it's supposed to work. The report that we did showed that that plant is designed and protected against an earthquake that provides ground motion at the site of up to 0.4 Gs. The Hosbury fault and the more recent shoreline fault has been calculated to cause ground motion of 0.62 Gs to 0.75 Gs, depending on some assumptions. It may or may not make it. It's not designed to be protected against that much ground motion. The company has done an analysis of the plant's survival under 0.75 Gs and showed that things will survive. And in October of 2011, they submitted that analysis for the NRC, trying to get approval for that method to be the new baseline, the new standard for Diablo Canyon. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission came up with lists, pages of reasons why they could not accept that methodology. The NRC had 2 divisions that looked at it, risk analysis and engineering. Both of them came up with multiple reasons why it could not be accepted. So in October of 2012, PG&E withdrew that application. Rather than have the PR hit of having the NRC formally deny and reject it. But that's where we are. The NRC has looked at PG's analysis, found it totally unacceptable for many reasons, and yet the plant continues to run. That's not the way they've handled the same problem in the past. Again, as long as the plant doesn't have an earthquake anymore, it'll be fine. It's as safe today as Fukushima was on March 10th, 2011. Their luck ran out. I wouldn't buy lottery tickets here because I'd use your luck for other reasons, because you're going to need it because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has not got your back. One final point on whether it could happen here, and what really irked me about March 15, 2012, that date sticks in my mind if it hasn't occurred to you, was that 9 months prior to Fukushima, in June of 2010, the NRC issued an order to the owner of the Oconee nuclear plant in South Carolina. There's a dam called the Jocassee Dam, 300 feet tall, holds back an awful lot of water that's 21 or 22 miles up the river from Oconee. The NRC's analysts showed that if that dam were to break, it would flood the Oconee site to, ironically, 14 feet deep. It showed that if that occurred, the flood wall, protective flood wall, was 7 feet tall. The math doesn't work out well for Oconee. So what the NRC ordered was the plant to take 15 measures to better protect the dam from failing and better protect the plant from flooding should it occur. 9 months before Fukushima, they ordered a plant to be protected against flooding. And those measures haven't been taken, by the way, so it's not like they get credit for that. Then they testified to the Senate that it can't happen here. By the way, that order in June of 2010 was secret, was not made public. 2 very courageous NRC workers leaked it to the Huffington Post. We obtained it under the Freedom of Information Act. We currently have the Inspector General looking into how they withheld that information because there's no legal basis for the NRC not issuing that, making that order public. So we're looking for the illegal basis they used to do so. And once the Inspector General nails that down, I hope some people go to nuclear jail because that was bad. But I think our group is a safety advocate. We're not advocating that plants be permanently shut down. We are advocating that if plants aren't safe, let's do something other than study and excuse and downplay and ignore and lie about those problems. Let's fix them. Again, I said earlier, the way we are now, we know about these problems. By the way, Diablo Canyon is not the only one that doesn't meet fire protection regulations. There are 47 reactors, roughly half the ones in the United States don't meet the fire protection, including Browns Ferry, whose 1975 fire started it all. Unit 1 at Browns Ferry was shut down for 22 years. They started up in 2007 with an exemption from the NRC from having to meet the fire protection. Apparently 22 years wasn't enough time to come into compliance with an agency in the industry that claims that nuclear safety is their top priority. What would second or third priority look like if that's top priority? With that, I think the last thing I should do, which may have come up in the questions anyway, was I mentioned earlier in the opening remarks, American democracy is best when it's not a spectator sport. I often say, and even to the NRC, that NRC stands for Nielsen Ratings Commission. It's amazing the difference, a few headlines, political pressure, Congress pressure, elected officials, even though they're not binding, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If there's enough hue and cry, the NRC will reluctantly, perhaps, regretfully, they will take the right action. We've seen that over and over again. We don't understand why it takes so much work to win no-brainers, but if that's the game we're playing, that's what we'll do. But in addition to attending here, letters to the editors, calls to congressional offices really do make a difference. I should write a report on something all the time working with people around the country. The difference that they made has been I'll give you one example. Paul Gunter, a colleague of mine who works in D.C., was working at an NRC meeting where they're trying to just make this fire protection issue go away and basically give everybody credit for where they are and just pretend that the rules don't exist. Well, he managed to say something at the meeting that struck the New York Times reporters fancy. It was in the paper the next day. When the New York Times does something, people read it. Even though they don't have cartoons, I don't really get that. He stopped that nonsense with that one word that's picked up by the New York Times. One individual. And it's not an isolated case. People get it again and make a difference. So I appreciate you coming out tonight. I'd be glad to entertain any questions or